Okay, hello, everyone. I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and I would like to welcome you to today's program. As you see, 6 mistakes that sabotage Scrum adoptions and how to avoid them. Our presenter today is going to be John Clifford. He's Senior Technical Fellow at Construx, who's presenting this webinar. Before we get into it, I have a couple of brief housekeeping announcements to make. There will be a live Q&A session after the presentation. To ask a question, simply go to the Q&A panel at the lower right-hand side of the interface, type in your question, hit send. I'll answer live as many as time allows, and we'll try to answer as many as we can also via email after the event. Secondly, this web seminar will be available on demand in the next 24 to 48 hours on the sdtimes.com website in the webinars section. As we've been reporting in SD Times, Scrum is perhaps the most popular Agile process in adoption today. Some organizations, though, aren't sure what Scrum can do and what it cannot do. As you'll learn today, Scrum is not a silver bullet for software development, but it does mark change in your organization's development processes. Tell us more about how to avoid those Scrum adoption mistakes. I'll turn it over now to John Clifford. John, go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Well, as we mentioned, we're going to talk today about 6 mistakes that sabotage Scrum adoptions and webinar. I want to talk to you and make sure everybody understands what Scrum is really about and what really happens when you adopt it. I want to talk about 6 common mistakes that we see often in our consulting engagements, and they're also pretty prevalent throughout the industry, and why they happen. I then want to talk about how to prevent these mistakes from happening, or if they have happened, how we can address them and mitigate them so we can either minimize their impact or change the damage and get rid of it. And talk to you so to make sure that if you understand if you're ready for Scrum, because it's not just about doing Agile or doing Scrum, it's about being Agile. It's a different mindset. So here's what we're going to say on what Scrum isn't, and especially what it is. And then the 6 mistakes that we most often see. Mistake 1 is there's no clear reason for most organizations to adopt Scrum when they're kind of stuck. They don't really know why they've adopted Scrum. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. Mistake number 2, organizational buy-in. People lip service to Scrum, but they don't really do it. Mistake 3, no foundation for success. Although people adopt Scrum, they don't ensure that the organization is ready to support Scrum, and so that everybody's on the same page. Mistake number 4, not really adopting Scrum. We just see this a lot when people do what I call hybrid pick-and-choose Scrum adoptions, where people will pick one practice or not another. And Scrum is something you just can't pick 1 or 2 practices and say that you're doing Scrum, because it doesn't work that way. Sometimes the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Number 5 is no permission to fail. In solutions, the penalty for failure is very extreme, and so people are afraid to take chances. Unfortunately, one of the best ways of learning is to make a mistake. And if you don't give your people permission to fail, if it's an honest failure where they can learn from it, then people are very reluctant to take the risk on of trying to change. Mistakes is often done by the gung-ho companies. Too much change too soon. So once we're mistakes, I'll go over some key points, wrap it up and explain why you should consider Scrum even after all of this. Talk about what Scrum isn't. Scrum isn't a silver bullet, as Dave mentioned earlier. I don't know if you have heard of Fred Book's famous quote, "There is no such thing as a silver bullet." And we all know where the silver bullet analogy came from. It's that single bullet in your revolver that would kill the werewolf in the horror movies. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. You cannot get one quick fix that'll fix everything that's wrong with your organization and make you the fastest and most productive company out there in developing software. So Scrum is the answer, but it's an environmental force that makes you ask the questions that lead to the answer. The solution to your problems. Ken Schwaber is quoted famously for saying, "Scrum doesn't solve your problems, Scrum exposes your problems." A lot of companies are having failures in projects, and they don't know why. It seems like everything's going great to the very end, and all of a sudden things are off the rails. What Scrum does is it gives you incredible visibility into what's going on in your project at all times, including very early on in the project. Now, when you see what your problems are, you have a choice. You have a choice to solve your problems or not. Deming is famous for saying failure is an option. So you can either choose to succeed or you can choose to succeed. But if you choose not to succeed or choose not to, it's the same thing. Scrum is not a silver bullet, but if you're looking at it as a means of increasing your ability to deliver high-quality software in a timely manner, then you're ahead of the game and you've got the right concept. Scrum also is a way to develop software without discipline. In this industry, there's this myth that Agile means that you don't have to have discipline when you develop software, and nothing could be further from the truth. And we'll misuse Scrum in the Agile Manifesto as a means to deduct responsibility or the need for organization and discipline. We need to release people that Agile Manifesto says, even though we value the things on the left over the things on the right, it's not the same as ignoring the things on the right. We don't ignore processes and tools. We only ignore them if change them if they're getting in the way. We value the things on the right unless they interfere with what we're trying to do on the left. Scrum is organizational change meta process masquerading as a project management process wrapper. What does that mean? That Scrum is really only guaranteed to do one thing, to make your organization fail very visibly during the first sprint. And by fail, you're going to expose the problems that you have, the impediments that are in your organization that prevent you from getting software done as quickly as you need to. At that point, the blinders come off. You see why you failed, and you can do something about it. You can see what impediments are, and you can fix them. So think of the red pill in the matrix that can go off the system and flushes them out of the system. Scrum will flush your problems out into the open. Because it provides transparency into the true status of your work, it quickly and ruthlessly expose problems your organization has that prevent it from developing software efficiently and effectively. Enforced time box commitments combined with a sprint review and retrospective give the organization a tool to inspect and adapt that are used to make effective changes to the direction of your product, development processes, and organizational processes if necessary. Scrum is complicated. To me, this is one of its key benefits. I often tell people Scrum is simple but not easy. It's 3 roles, 4 meetings, artifacts, and 2 levels of commitment. It's an amalgamation of pre-existing best practices that combine to produce a whole that is much greater than the sum of its parts. The difficulty lies in the discipline of following the simple process and facing the truth as it is exposed instead of reverting to the old way, the way things were, and putting blindfolds back on. So let's take number 1. No clear reason to adopt Scrum. Do you have a understanding of your current software development life cycle? Do you understand the process by which you develop software from beginning to end? And if so, do you know where the constraints are and what the primary constraint is and how Scrum could possibly help? Do you currently do or don't deliver software? Do you know you could deliver software? All are stuck in what I call the realm of the possible. It's because their imagination hasn't stretched. For instance, when Richard Bannister was in the Olympics and trying to run the 4-minute mile back in the early part of the 20th century, everybody thought a 4-minute mile was impossible. They tried for many years and no one had broken it. And finally, Bannister ran the 4-minute mile, and within 6 months, half a dozen other people had run a 4-minute mile because they had seen what was possible. Some of those companies that are developing software today think that the way they're developing software, even if it's not as what they would like it to be, they really believe that that's about as well as they could do it. And Scrum gives a real eye-opener for this. So what do you mean by adopting Scrum? What's your current approach? Why do you need to change? What success? Most projects of all types fail because of insufficient understanding of the problem that the project is intended to solve. We call it insufficient requirements. So this is true of a software project as it is of a change project. And Scrum really is a change project because you're going to change the way you develop software. It's important that your organization establish clear objectives and success criteria, conditions of satisfaction, by which a Scrum option can be guided and judged. So let's talk action strategies. To address the mistake of not having a clear reason to adopt Scrum, what about the vision statement for the Scrum adoption, describing what success looks like? We do this projects, and again, transitioning to Scrum is another project. Document existing software development workflow. Diagram your processes, the current problems in terms of the effects they cause. It helps to create a value stream map, which is a technique from Lean and Six Sigma, to understand exactly what's going on in your software development process, how long each step actually takes versus how long it actually should take. That'll help you spot inefficiencies. It's criteria for measuring progress and determining success. Again, in terms of problem effect statements instead of problem solution statements. We don't want to say that our projects, our requirements are bad, because that implies that the solution is to improve your requirements. Now, that may very well be the solution, but if you have a problem with a solution already at hand, you could be missing the larger problem. Maybe the problem is that you truly don't understand the needs of your customer. So it's not that your requirements process is bad, it's that you really truly don't understand what your customer wants. Using the goal, question, metric technique is helpful, where you think you'd like to accomplish, you come up with one or more questions that can be answered quantitatively. And for each question, come up with one or more metrics that can be used to quantitatively answer that question. Here's an example. Let's say the goal was to increase the predictability of our software projects. How could have your predictions been at the beginning of our projects in the previous? So your metric might be the ratio of beginning project duration estimates to the actual project durations. That's a percentage. Another might be the ratio of beginning project cost estimates to actual project cost as a percentage. And another metric might be percentage of features in the initial project scope that were shipped. So in other words, you had to drop features late in the life of the project to make the ship date, then you probably estimated the effort required to get the project done. You know, a question you might want to ask yourself is how could have our predictions been halfway through the project, and use our metrics, and so forth. A performance baseline using the criteria for the new goals. This will help you focus on the relevant issues, so you see where you're starting from and where you're going to. Mistake number, no organizational buy-in. Not willing to change at all levels. The organization as a whole just doesn't believe that Scrum will work or that Scrum can work. Maybe some Scrum is seen as this year's change initiative. Whatever the reason, if the organization thinks it only needs to give lip service to the Scrum practices and processes, then you're in deep trouble because it means you really aren't going to adopt Scrum. You have to change at all levels as the need for change becomes apparent. You need to change what you're currently doing, and it's not working all right now, and it will only bring you pain because you're going to see all these problems, but you're not going to fix them. Respect to follow Scrum practices and processes can be a huge problem. Managers continue to assign work to subordinates, ignoring the Scrum commitments, which means that their subordinates can't meet their commitments in Scrum, which means their projects slip. Sometimes abdicate their management responsibilities altogether, saying something like, the Scrum Master is supposed to remove your impediments, not me. Go see her. Well, that delegation and abdication doesn't exactly help you get your problem solved. You include functional managers because they have a very important role to play in the Scrum organization. Sometimes functional managers may impede process changes. I don't care what your team decided, the manager might say. You'll need to do it the way I tell you to. Again, the problem is we don't let the team use the inspect and adapt to learn how to improve our processes. What if you have no authority to protect the team from outside interference? For example, the Scrum Master is a dev lead who works for the dev manager, who violates the Scrum process and uses his position to quash objections. Or another example, the product owner works for another functional manager and ignores the Scrum Master, changing the sprint backlog during the sprint without consulting with the team or abandoning the sprint. What if other functional or project managers assign work to Scrum team members disregarding their commitments to the sprint backlog and delaying their Scrum project? Promotion, compensation aligned with Scrum practices and processes. A lot of it reward individual heroism. You know, we call it the horse syndrome, where somebody rides in on the white horse to save the failing project. That's great, except for the fact that a lot of times the people who we call firefighters are in many ways pyromaniacs. They intentionally do this, but a lot of times people in development organizations get a vicarious thrill out of riding in and saving the day. When in all, if we're at things we're supposed to be doing all along, we shouldn't have crises. We need to make sure that we reward teamwork and not individual heroics, because you tend to get what you reward and what you measure. So if we reward heroics, we get heroics. If we reward steady progress and performance, we'll get that instead. Are you receptive to Agile values, principles, and practices? Are you enthusiastic and willing to adopt Scrum? Sometimes they're not. This can be a big problem. A lot of times, a long-standing dysfunctional culture that quashes initiative and harsh punishes honest mistakes. In lows where management doesn't trust employees to use common sense and good judgment, individuals don't trust their managers either to be honest and selfless in their decision making. This can be a huge problem because Scrum wants a high trust organization. Now you can trust, but it takes time. Do you hand on self-empowerment? Management must also embrace a self-empowerment paradigm of Scrum. So that often means that management needs some training on Scrum. And control under stress. A lot of basically people who have issues with Scrum want to fall back into what they were doing before. If you're doing anything new and it's hard, you want to fall back to what you knew. You can't do that. You also have the agile paradigm of fixing schedule and floating scope. Most companies schedule and scope and throw additional resources at late projects, and this never works. As the man month, throwing late people at project, when you have a project and you throw additional resources at it, all you do is make the project later. And this can be some organizations' refusal to prioritize and also refusal for making decisions for fear of accountability. So let's talk about strategies. Very important that you ensure stakeholders that they understand that a successful Scrum adoption is a journey, not a destination. You want to do them today and be 100% effective tomorrow. Every you change the way you do things, there's a temporary decrease in performance. This is called the performance curve or J curve, whereas people adopt a new way of doing things because they haven't internalized the processes yet, the performance decreases. And it takes a amount of time to get back to parity to where they were before, and then we'll see an increase in performance until it stabilizes at a new higher level. So this doesn't happen overnight. Again, expect to change your results. You must expect to change the way you work at every level. You need to communicate functional managers to ensure they understand their roles are going to be changing for the better. They won't task assignment anymore. They'll be doing employee empowerment. And they won't be doing decision making as much. They'll be making strategic decisions. And this is actually a better use of a functional manager's time. You need to know that Scrum roles are given the necessary authority to succeed. Managers try to co-opt Scrum Masters into becoming de facto project managers or work assigners. In Scrum, the Scrum Masters don't assign work, and neither does the product owner. The team self-assigns based upon the work that's available in the backlog. If we break paradigm, we break the paradigm of self-empowerment. You shouldn't try to go around the Scrum processes and bypass the product owner or Scrum Master to assign work. I happen often where somebody walks in and has something that's very urgent that may or may not be important, and it's going to take a little bit, they think, so they want the person on the Scrum team to stop what they're doing and just do this for me real quick. It'll only take you a couple hours. Well, the problem is it usually doesn't take just a couple of hours, and there's usually just one person that's interrupting one member of one team to do this. It starts becoming widespread. So in many organizations is that everybody goes to the team, to individual team members, to their buddy maybe, to try and get their work done first. The note, which is when you're running Scrum, is that everybody collaborates with the product owner to ensure that the work is prioritized according to the needs of the business. Again, this means there has to be trade-offs. We have to prioritize some items above others. And a lot of times when people are trying to bypass the Scrum process and the product owner, it's a big symptom of the fact that the organization is very reluctant or refusing to prioritize. You may need to revisit the employee review process to guidelines and objectives. Again, away from rewarding heroic individual effort into rewarding teamwork, because we want to get teamwork. It has to take the lead when it comes to supporting change, because you won't get buy-in from the individual contributors on your team, either from the mid-management, if the executives don't walk the walk. This means to adopt agile principles and practices when managing the team managers. To be self-empowered, management needs to support self-empowerment in the early painful stages, because it will not assume responsibility if management always steps in to correct what it sees as problems. You have to let people get out there and try, and when they have a little bit of a problem, there's a tendency, especially if there's not been a lot of trust, the individuals will step back and wait for somebody to come in and save them. And this is where the good managers will prod them and saying, no, this is your ball now. You have to run with it. If you have a question, I'll be glad to help you answer it, but you have to step up and solve your problems. And again, understand which side of the Pareto curve you want to be on. Is it date with 100% of your items only 80% done, or 80% of your items 100% done? Think about it. Which gives the company more options? Most projects hit that ship date with 100% of the items 80% done, and at that point you have no options. You have to continue. You have to flip the schedule. We have 80% done, 100% done. You ship a high-quality product with reduced functionality. But if prioritized correctly, 20% that's not done is the 20% that 80% of your customers will never use. So it probably doesn't even matter. Many companies use the float scope. Like we mentioned earlier, they throw resources at late projects, and they really are floating both scope and quality, and they're late anyways. You have float scope. That choosing to do so shows that you're not willing to prioritize. The foundation for success. Executive level sponsorship or backing. It's to get permission to adopt Scrum. You actually have to have support and protection from an executive sponsor. Now, success means or looks like. What goals is the transition? Why are we adopting Scrum? What will be better? Identifying or selecting a single product owner. Every project needs a single person who is responsible for project success and accountable for project failure. That role is the project manager's role. In Scrum belongs to the product owner. Responsibilities, different duties. Team projects still need one person as a chief product owner. You may have a team product owner or a product owner delegate who helps that team and who helps organize that team's work, but that product owner delegate will work for the chief product owner, who is ultimately responsible. Now, managers from overriding the process. The Scrum Master must have the organizational authority to protect his team from interference by functional managers. If no man serve two masters, you've got a pool of work from the sprint backlog, and people have made commitments to that, and then additional work comes in that has not been planned or allocated for, then the team will not have enough bandwidth to get the additional work done, which is usually urgent but not important, and their project work done, which is usually important and not urgent. Never let the urgent or the important suffer from the urgent. The product owner recognizes a sole decision maker for what work will be done by the Scrum team. Scrum team members must be allowed to decide how to work. Now, they may input from their engineering management, but they should decide on what order they're going to work on the task to get work items done. So how they're going to get the work done to meet their commitments, and to self-assign task as necessary without management interference. Not having a common understanding of what Scrum is. Usually when companies skimp on training, they buy one or two books that are passed around, and then people get started. And as I mentioned earlier, Scrum is simple, but it's not easy. Sometimes, again, as maybe as a means of economization, phone was ringing here. I'm trying to turn it off here real quickly. Somebody's will optimize on training, so they will not go ahead and spend the money on keeping a firm involved. So they'll have different trainers that come on board, and as a result, you have different people teaching Scrum in different ways, and sometimes these messages that the teams get are in contrast. So which way is right and which way is wrong? So the teams spend a lot of time arguing about what is proper Scrum and what is not. What if they don't touch a cognitive terms? When we say iteration, is an iteration going to be, does that mean a release or whatever? We want to make sure that everybody's on the same page when it comes to terms, and this ties in basically with having common training. The problem I see in a lot of companies, especially when they're running multiple teams, is they don't establish a chief Scrum Master who owns a process across groups. He becomes the arbiter of the process. And not correcting organizational hierarchy-related obstructions. For instance, functional roles need to be redefined away from command and control to manager to empowering the teams and solving problems. And again, that we can't have cross-functional teams. We want to have a Scrum team of developers and a Scrum team of testers. And the reason we can't have a proper cross-functional team because we have a separate QA manager and a development manager, and they won't work together. That is a problem. Strategies for not having that foundation include things like appointing an executive sponsor at the appropriate level to provide the necessary support. They should understand and agree with the Scrum paradigm. If they don't believe in Scrum, they won't be an effective sponsor. So kind of self-empowered teams, letting the teams assign the work, and so forth. This person should have the clout to settle disputes that may occur in a manner that facilitates successful Scrum adoption. Think of them. Stakeholders and executive sponsors sponsors to create a clear vision of what success looks like. Because if we don't know where we're going, any road will take us there. Owner accountability. This is what we talked about, having that single point of ownership for a Scrum project, the single product owner. Again, responsibility without authority is a recipe for failure. We can't make somebody responsible for a project if they don't have the authority to make decisions for it. To assign a single owner is another symptom of an organizational inability to make decisions. We want to responsibilities and the review system reflect the role changes that are a part of the Scrum paradigm. Managers no longer assign work, and they shape the environment to help employees be as productive as possible. So don't choose between getting a good review and successfully adopting Scrum or being successfully helping their team, because people will all choose what's best for them. So make sure you align so that individual goals are aligned with the organization's goals. Strongly choose a single source for Scrum training and coaching, because different patients may have a different spin, leading to confusion. Consider organizational changes are necessary to prevent conflict of interest scenarios. For instance, look at a QA manager that reports to the dev manager. Oftentimes, the dev manager will override them to discontinue early testing because numerous defects slow ability to deliver code. An example I like to use in my class is about the 5 product managers, where a company adopting Scrum had 5 product managers who were on 5 separate projects and had one development team. They adopted Scrum. They did a draw of a hat and chose one of the product managers to be the product owner. And in Scrum, the product owner is the sole arbiter of the prioritization of the backlog. Now, he's shifting to his stakeholders, but he is solely responsible for the success of the project. Now, in the organization, each product owner was compensated strictly on how well his individual project did in the market and how quickly he could ship. So as you mentioned, there was a lot of discussion and argument about which work items should come first. And so the team finally hashed out over a several-day meeting. They came up with a backlog. They distributed the work for all the projects evenly throughout the backlog, and everyone was satisfied. So they went at night preparing to kick off the sprint the next morning. And the other product managers came in the next morning. The product owner had reprioritized the backlog to put all of his work items at the very top. And I can't do that. And he said, yes, I can. I'm the product owner. I have sole responsibility for prioritization of the backlog. And the other project managers went to the Scrum Master, who was a coach, and said, hey, you've got to stop him from doing this. He is messing all of our projects up. Now, the Scrum Master at that point, he said, I'm the keeper of the process. I have to make sure that people follow the Scrum process. The product is the owner of the backlog, and he's responsible for prioritization. So he is perfectly within his rights to do what he did. So at that point, the product managers got together and went and messed into their vice president's office and said, if we don't change this, we're all quitting. And they exposed the dysfunction of the company, which was that the compensation was not tied to the organizational goals. The compensation encouraged everybody to be selfish and not work together as a team. So the compensation was changed and straightened the backlog out, and as a result, there was a lot less competition, a lot more cooperation. You're going to have an agile trainer or coach, who's an independent party, because they can provide an independent opinion on this. An independent party will have no dog in the fight, so to speak, and so they'll be perfectly willing to give you an honest opinion, and it won't be biased by, again, compensation or review considerations. Mistake number 4, not really adopting Scrum. Allowing groups to pick and choose from among the essential Scrum practices and processes. And invariably, people will refrain from adopting the practices and processes that expose problems. No one likes to look at problems. Requiring adherence to existing practices and processes that run counter to Scrum practices and processes. For instance, we want to have a multitasking. We assign people to multiple projects and teams at the same time. We think we're being more efficient. Or testing outside of the team so it cannot be done during the sprint. So how do we actually know if something is done or not? Or we assign work to people. Despite the Scrum paradigm of letting people assign their own work. Some organizations refuse to allow the team to make process improvements when existing processes are hindering their productivity. For instance, they have an unreliable build process, but the team can't fix it because it's owned by another organization. Or there are tool mandates by the engineering organization that are really slowing the team down. Let's say they're using a compiler or an integrated development environment that is buggy and they can't fix it. How do we mitigate? Well, we should require adherence to the minimal Scrum processes. The Scrum industry or the Scrum community has a phrase for organizations that adopt practices of Scrum, but not all. We call that Scrum but. As an example, I use Scrum, but we're not running daily stand-ups. Or we're doing Scrum, but we don't have a sprint backlog, and we don't time box our sprints. We just work on things until we feel like it's ready to go. So I encourage people to think of Scrum and rather than Scrum but. So Scrum and additional processes if it makes sense. You can do more than a minimal Scrum process, but not less. This means that we have the 4 meetings, we have the 4 artifacts, and so forth. Invest in the necessary training to create a chief Scrum Master, who's the key and arbiter of the Scrum process before you can scale Scrum across the organization. This way you have one person you can go to who is the final arbiter on how we should do Scrum. They use the same engineering practices, but they must do the minimal Scrum processes. And that's Scrum Master's job, not to make sure that people follow the Scrum but to make sure they follow Scrum. The Scrum Master will make sure that he enforces the minimal processes. He'll make sure that impediments are removed, and he'll escalate them to someone who can remove them. It's otherwise not breaking Scrum. And change for change's sake. Don't change for the sake of change. But if there's something that's broken, you change it. Change as it becomes necessary. Check if change is wasteful and counterproductive. It's confusing and randomizing to your team. But current approach is inefficient or failing is wasteful and counterproductive also. So the Deming approach, or plan, do, check, act, is a good way of diagnosing if you have a problem, what you need to change to fix it. Remember, don't tell the teams how to do their job. Allow teams to own the how and encourage them to improve. Work if the team cannot change their development practices and processes. Mistake, no permission to fail. Forcing commit to schedules before they understand and internalize Scrum. Meeting their initial Scrum commitments. Setting reasonable expectations. Set an unreasonable deadline. We're adopting Scrum for this new project. It's got to be done in 3 months with this scope. So they had a chance to estimate the project or figure if it's feasible or not, but we've already put an unreasonable expectation on them. Remember that as we're changing a process here, we have to give the team time to learn the new process, which means with the performance curve, the performance will drop until it stabilizes and then starts improving past the previous point. Reverter stress is a common active of teams that don't have permission to fail. If things are going right, somebody wants to step in and go back to the old way to save the project. Remember, you have to refrain from doing this, from stepping in and fixing things like they're going wrong. You have to manage your teams. Don't command them or tell them. Use mistakes as a useful opportunity for learning instead of castigating. So the only mistake is really is the failure to learn. That's the only real failure in Scrum. It's only your period. You have to understand and acknowledge the difference between a goal, an estimate, and a commitment. Many companies can use those. Versus the goal is something you want to get done. An estimate is how long you think it's going to take. And commitment is your basically on the dotted line that you can do it. Most confuse estimates and commitments, and goals and commitments. They're not the same. You have to accept a cone of uncertainty by the lack of precision early on in the project. When you first have a large project, you're not going to know exactly when you're going to be finished. And if you think you are, you're fooling yourself. Bigger units of time, work in quarters or months rather than weeks or days. And any estimate is going to have variances with it, either perceived confidence or a plus-minus range. Valid project estimates are very imprecise early on. They're accurate, but they're not going to be precise. They'll become refined as the project progresses and historical data is available. The thing about Scrum is that the historical data on a Scrum project comes from the very same project that you're working on, so it's the most accurate form of historical data. The Scrum floating scope will enable the organization to make the appropriate trade-offs if required. Efficiencies that result from Scrum-driven process improvements, such as self-assignment and pulling tasks, can drastically improve the team's productivity. So a lot of times, teams will start off a little bit slower, but they'll end up much faster. So you have to cover how it can lead to an incorrect perception of failure because of that very early decrease in performance. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means that you're learning. Must be prepared to tolerate decreased performance until the team internalizes the new processes. It should improve to the previous baseline within weeks and should exceed the baseline within months if you're doing it right. If not, then you've got an impediment that you're either refusing to face or that you're consciously not fixing. You have a culture of accepting failure as the price of learning. Because sometimes to see if something really works is to try it. People are afraid to take reasonable risks. There's no change. Just people for honest mistakes. You should encourage recoverable errors. There's lots of errors you can make: recoverable errors and non-recoverable errors. Recoverable errors are those errors that can quickly be corrected with little to no impact on the project. Just setting an ambitious sprint commitment voluntarily. You overcommit a little bit at the beginning. You got as much as you could possibly get done. Is that a failure? No, it just means that you need to not commit as much so that you can get more predictability. Non-errors are those errors that will harm the company. Things like being late on a project and being forced to meet a deadline, so instead of taking the time to do it right, you ship a buggy product. Most in the industry, very few people forget products that are a week or two or a month or two late, but everyone remembers projects that were shipped that were defective. I want to mention the names of companies and major projects. I'm sure you're all thinking about that in your head right now, of the last major release of a last major piece of software from a huge software company that was not well received because of quality issues. So implementation is stepping in and fixing things at the first sign of trouble. You have to let people learn. So you have to recoverable errors. And you should be able to ask the team what went wrong and why, and what they plan to do about it. That's how you actually help the team self-correct. You don't tell them what to do. You do them in a Socratic way. You ask the proper questions to lead them to the answers. Too much too soon. This is mistake number 6. It's a bad problem because it certainly means that your organization is really enthusiastic about your Scrum transition. But usually when teams go all in, they do the large-scale transitions without a successful pilot program. But it's pretty risky. It's hard to team up and running. It's much harder to get numerous teams up and running. It can be much harder. But it can work if your C executives give you active support and there's a mandate for change. Major engineering practices or change initiatives at the same time can also be too much change too soon. This can be change for the sake of change. And that, again, as we mentioned earlier, can be counterproductive. Scrum your problems quickly with your engineering practices. So don't make changes early. Let Scrum expose the problems, and then make the changes to address specific problems as they're exposed. Sometimes both their processes and their tools, their source configuration management tools, their test automation frameworks, their build systems, their build environments, etc. When you create a lot of change, it's destabilizing. Any change is destabilizing, but the more things you change, the more destabilizing it is. So change creates that chaos and lowers productivity. So sequence your changes to minimize the chaos. That better is the enemy of good enough. So thing at a time and change it to make it better. If it's good enough, leave it and focus on what needs to be changed. And an organization's ability to tolerate change depends upon its process maturity. It really depends upon its organizational maturity. And what we mean by that is organizations that have low maturity tend to be very intolerant of change because it's scary to them. Okay, most organizations that are transitioning to Scrum are immature. They don't have defined, repeatable processes in their software development lifecycle, and they don't have any metrics, especially quantitative metrics, that let them assess the impact of change. So they're very risk-averse and change intolerant. And any change initiatives that exceed the organization's tolerances will fail because stakeholders will run out of patience or tolerance before the change comes out of the bottom of the J-curve and starts passing the previous baseline. You have the performance curve and its implications when you start doing change. So it's better off small and be successful than stuff big. The big change may be successful, but your organization may not give you the time to do it. They're trying to do it large or fast. Make it slowly. Confidence will come with experience. This is true with martial arts or any other physical activity. If you learn how to play golf, you don't have a fast swing, you're trying to get a good swing, and then you work on getting it stronger. Scrum, to which engineering practices and processes need to be changed. Scrum will expose your problems. Trust me on that. Choose the most painful problem first. Use that Pareto principle. The thing from theory of constraints that says even though an organization may have several constraints in its processes, there's one primary constraint or bottleneck. Find and address that bottleneck. It doesn't take changes to have a large beneficial effect. And it's better to change one thing, assess impact, and then rinse and repeat as necessary. Emphasize this: change one thing at a time. You know, when we develop software, we change one thing at a time, and then we see what effect that had. We don't change 5 things because we don't know if one of those things fix a problem or cause another problem. In processes, when we're talking about doing a change initiative here. The changes to tools is at the end of a project or before the start of a next project. Try not to change tools in the middle of a project unless it's absolutely necessary. Keep operational stress to acceptable levels, but not introducing unnecessary changes or trying to change too much too quickly. And significant business reasons to change foundational engineering tools, hold off on making those changes until process changes have stabilized. Let's go to key points here. Establish a stakeholder consensus on why you're adopting Scrum and what you expect to gain. Be willing to accept change and embrace the Scrum paradigm. Make sure you're on the same page as to why you're adopting Scrum and what it looks like. You want to make sure that you're willing to accept change. It's because insanity is a definition of doing the same thing and expecting different results. That saying in mind when people resist change or refuse to accept the idea that Scrum can work in their organization. Ignorant pain often accompanies meaningful change, and be prepared to tolerate it. That light of the tunnel isn't a train heading your way. It's meaningful change and all the good that comes with it. Set expectations so that everyone realizes adopting Scrum won't be painless. How much will be a function of how willing your organization is to embrace change and address problems. The more willing you're willing to change, the less you'll have to suffer. To adopt it in its entirety and ensure everyone knows what that means by common training. Notable experience working with companies around the world that have struggled with Scrum is that they pick and choose from among the Scrum practices and processes. Don't do it. Until you understand something, including Scrum, and you've been doing it for a year or two, you won't understand how not doing something that seems relatively unimportant can totally mess things up. Think of Scrum as an extremely effective diet and fitness program that won't work if you don't follow it rigorously. All it takes is discipline. How bad do you want it? Accepting reasonable failure is the price of learning. You must be able to make reasonable mistakes if you want to create a culture of continuous improvement. Change the culture to reward people for trying something worthwhile, even if the results weren't all you hoped for. And failures are viewed not as someone's fault, but as a lack of sufficient understanding of the problem. You do Scrum well before trying to do it large or fast. All teams have the Tuckman model: form, storming, norming, performing. Perform grades in the first 2 stages, return to the previous baseline at the early part of the norming stage, and improves to a new, much higher baseline during the latter part of the norming stage and off into the performing stage. Team maturity improves, the time to cycle through the stages decreases. You'll get faster going through that cycle. Recognized improvements are often preceded by a temporary decrease in capability as the new processes are learned and internalized, and don't add unnecessary stress to people. Points, why should you even go through all of this? Because it's a very effective way of optimizing your software development processes. Scrum is also an effective way of significantly increasing your organization's ability to deliver high-quality software in a timely manner. It's an effective way to identify and eliminate non-productive work, reduce or eliminate waste. Scrum is a very effective way to improve employee morale and job satisfaction while increasing employee productivity. Hard to believe both of those at the same time. And become implemented correctly provides a clear marketplace advantage over your non-agile competitors. Just your home wasn't built in a day, but it was built. You're not going to see massive improvement overnight. Scrum isn't a silver bullet, but you will see improvement in a few months. You'll see significant improvement in a few months. And in a year or so, you probably won't recognize your organization because you've improved so much. And that's the webinar, a formal part of the webinar. Now will be question time.
Yes, very good, John. I think you hit a lot of the high points that I know in our interviewing that we've heard from a lot of people about agile adoption and what it means. So, we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to get moving through those as quickly as we can. So let me start out with the first question. 6 months ago, a word came down from upper management that we were going agile. We were given new processes to follow, and we're told that we would be doing Scrum. We're having problems meeting our scheduled dates, and we're not sure what to do. Should they do?
Well, at that point, depending on the size of the organization, they obviously aren't doing Scrum. So they need some help. And at that point, I recommend if you think how much does it cost our organization per week to not be able to release a product, how much are we losing in terms of wasted time and in terms of team cost? It probably would be inexpensive to bring a coach or consultant in to assess what you're doing and to give you some quick pointers on how to get back on track. So basically, I would tell people if you think you're doing Scrum and you're not, and you're still struggling, they're most likely not doing Scrum. And at that point, it's hard for you to diagnose your own problems. You get some of the several excellent Scrum books that are available, but your best at that point, if timeliness is important to you, which it seems like it would be with that question, is to is to get in contact with a company that does Scrum training and coaching and bring them over and have them give you a hand and get you straightened out.
Right. That's a very good point. Okay, a couple of other questions. I work for a large company with a family of products, and we've had very mixed success with Scrum. Is it possible that it won't work for large companies?
Well, anything's possible, except for there are several large companies that are using Scrum, and the question itself tells you that you're having mixed success. So I have to wonder, some teams are doing a better job of executing Scrum than others are in your company. And the question there is not to say Scrum doesn't work, but to ask, why are some teams better at it than others? Why are some teams having success and others aren't? And it's probably because some teams are doing things that other teams aren't. So this is those things we talked about having a chief Scrum Master who's the keeper of the process, who can look at teams and make sure that the processes are aligned and that they're doing the same things. And also, you can use, at this point, if you have successful Scrum teams, your Scrum Master is an internal coach. Ask him to come observe your Scrum ceremonies, your planning meetings, your daily stand-ups, your reviews and perspectives, and see if he can spot some obvious things that you can change to make a difference.
Right. Curious, just along those same lines, is it really critical for every team that's doing Scrum to be doing it exactly the same way? I mean, they're always going to have differences in the abilities of people on the teams and things of that nature, but if they're each seeing success in their own way, is it critically important that they're following the exact same regimented process?
Well, that's the what versus the how, right? So I think it's very important that you follow the minimal Scrum process. That's the what. But how you follow those processes will vary across teams, right?
Right.
So in other words, if as long as all the teams are having a daily stand-up and it's time boxed at 50 minutes or less, so you're not wasting people's times, and you're getting the information you need out of that stand-up, the exact process of how you do it is not as important. Some teams may throw a ball around to indicate who has the floor, so to speak. Some teams will just come in and speak quickly and get out. What we care about is the outcome, right, not the actual process within that. But it's important that we do that daily stand-up, for instance.
Right. Good. Okay, the next couple of questions I'll bundle up. I think you addressed these in the last couple of slides that you did, but I'll put it out there for you to reiterate. First part of the question is it crucial to adopt Scrum across all teams instead of maybe one team first and then have others follow? And secondly, if the first couple of sprints are rough, how do you convince executives that they'll see results soon?
Okay. Well, I'll answer the first question first, and we'll talk about that. It's crucial to adopt Scrum across all teams. In fact, I recommend having a small pilot team to do it. Part of that, having the company learn the processes and practices. If you have one team that can run a small project that is important but not maybe mission critical, we don't want an unimportant project because then it won't get the attention it needs or the prioritization that it needs. So we choose a small project that can be done by one team of 5 to 9 people that will take 3 to 6 months. That is important to the company, but is not life or death mission critical, if at all possible. And then we get that one up and running well, and by the time we're done with that project, or even halfway through it, the team really understands Scrum and how to do it, and they'll start making significant progress. And at that point, rather than people being afraid of Scrum, people want to adopt the same successes. They see that project being successful, and they want to be part of that, so they're more amenable to change at that point. As far as basically convincing executives, see results, have to be, manage our stakeholder expectations, which means as part of a good Scrum adoption, we should talk with the executives and make them understand that they are going to see that temporary decrease in performance. But when we expose the visibility, we'll ask them, have you ever seen, been ever on a day-to-day basis, literally how well your team's doing and whether they're ahead, behind, or on schedule, and have it be honest information. And if the team can, most of our people who work at our companies, they're very good individual contributors, but for some reason, we have a lot of smart people that somehow can't seem to get these things done. And Scrum exposes those problems. And I think executives are willing to give people a chance, especially if what you're doing now isn't working, because it can't be worse than what you currently had, can it?
Good point. Very good. Okay, moving right along, another question that we have here from one of our participants. What are initial basic technical requirements for enterprise-level system development using Scrum?
technical requirements. Well, first I'll say that Scrum does not mandate or dictate engineering practices. It's a process wrapper. So basically, there are no technical requirements for doing Scrum across the enterprise. So a lot of times when we start Scrum on a team, we don't change any engineering practices. We just wrap Scrum around their current practices and processes, because that will very quickly tell us what's not working. And then we see what's not working, we fix it. As I mentioned earlier, we rinse and repeat. We do that cycle continuously.
Right. What's the best practice?
Technical things. Now, there are a lot of good engineering best practices that some people call agile, such as test-driven development, or that's an example of refactoring, that aren't really agile per se. They're just good engineering best practices that will really work especially well in an agile environment.
Right. Very good. Okay, on to the next question. Kind of along the same lines. I guess this is more on the management side of things. So what tools would you recommend to support Scrum practices? Well,
especially with teams, I like starting with a whiteboard, doing everything manually and graphically, because it really illustrates the process and lets people understand it. And then beyond that, there are a variety of commercial tools that are basically agile project management software packages for the enterprise. I hate to go down the list and recommend things. A quick search through Google or Bing will tell you, the popular tools that are out there. Just look for Agile Project Management Tool or Scrum Project Management Tool.
Right.
And you will find things out there. A lot of good tools on the market, but you don't need a tool to start.
Okay. Okay, the questions start to get a little deeper now, and we're getting a little shorter on time, but we'll keep pushing ahead. The subtlety of the difference between estimate and commitment eluded me. Please, can you expand on that?
Okay, that's a great question. It really goes well beyond Scrum. It's one of the hearts of all the problems that we see in software development, is people confuse estimates and commitments. For example, let's say your boss comes to you and says, hey, we need to get this feature up and running to be competitive on our website with we're competing with, let's say, a big company that does all kinds of online products, retail sales, and we want to compete with them, so we need to add this feature to our website. How long will it take you? And you think about that and say, I think I could do that in about 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks or so. Okay, great, have it done in 2 weeks. So you were asked for an estimate, or you were asked for a commitment, but you provided an estimate back, and your boss took it as a commitment, right? Really, if somebody approaches you like that, you should say, I'm not sure. I need to give you a better answer. I can give you a quick estimate, but I can't commit to this, and make that clear. When I hear about 2 weeks or 2 weeks plus minus, anytime you hear any kind of vagueness or variance in there, that indicates that what you're hearing is an estimate. But when someone says, okay, I can do that in 2 weeks, or I'll have that done in 2 weeks, that's a commitment. A lot of times we get a problem, especially in the development organizations, is that we give estimates, but they're received as commitments. And we need to be careful about that. For instance, if we're doing some project planning where we've got our work breakdown structure prepared, and we're writing estimates for tasks in there, those estimates become commitments. So, 4 days here, 5 days there, somebody adds all that up and gets 478.25 man days, and there's the project commitment. But is that a commitment or an estimate?
Interesting. All right. At this point, I'd like to just remind people that if they want to submit a question, they can do it by typing it into the Q&A panel on the interface and hitting the submit button, and we'll get to as many as time allows. The next question is kind of along the same lines of what you were just discussing, and I think it's kind of funny, so we'll throw it out there to you. If the Scrum Master is having a problem controlling the product owner during estimation and planning, it's okay to have the product owner present during estimation and planning, only to answer questions and then leave?
That's a great question. And I would say if the product owner is trying to tell people what to do or how long things should take, then I think that he should be reminded of that the process says that he doesn't. That's not his role. Right. His role is to prioritize the items, to say what he needs to have done first, but the team decides. And yes, that is actually acceptable.
Yeah, good luck with that.
I've actually had teams that have fired their product owners.
Wow.
Because the product owner was a source of dysfunction. And all these people have to, we talked about product owners versus project managers. They have the same responsibilities, which is the success or failure of the project, but they have different duties, different tasks that they have to accomplish. The project manager creates a work breakdown structure, assigns tasks to resources, tracks progress, and so forth. Whereas the product owner creates the product backlog, which is a prioritized list of work items. And he basically decides in the order that things are implemented in, but he doesn't decide how long something's going to take, or basically that's not his role, because he can't do that. He doesn't have the expertise.
Okay, keeping it moving, we have another question. You mentioned 4 meetings and 4 artifacts, et cetera. Can you list them?
Sure. Well, we talked about it's 3 goals, 4 meetings, 4 artifacts, and 2 levels of commitment. So the 4 meetings are the sprint planning, the daily stand-up, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. And the 4 artifacts are the sprint burn-down chart, the release burn-down chart, the sprint backlog, and the product backlog.
Very good. Here's a good question for you. Do you have any advice for teams doing Scrum that have 1 or more members working remotely?
That is hard because, one of the big concepts of Agile is that face-to-face communications is more important than processes and tools. And so face-to-face communications give you the highest bandwidth. A lot we have a discussion over email. We end up walking down the hall to our colleague to address 2 days worth of email chain going back and forth in a couple minutes. Else is a substitute for that. I can suggest doing in that situation is have them call into your daily stand-up so they're on a speakerphone so they can hear what's going on in the room, and you have to take a real effort to communicate with them. So maybe you use tools like Google Chat where you can do video chatting for free, or things like that to help encourage that face-to-face communication style. At that point, probably need a software tool rather than using a manual project management tool such as a whiteboard where you track tasks using Post-it notes.
Okay. All right. Next question. I'm building a development team of about 3 to 5 people, so we have nothing to change. This is all new. What might my vision statement look like?
Well, I'd like to have my team be able to deliver software on time with high quality, according to previous plans that we made. So, if I don't have a good vision statement for it, it would be as a software development organization, I'd like to be able to deliver high quality software on time that meets customers' needs. Pretty good, a pretty effective vision. So that's what I would hope to get by adopting Scrum.
Right.
So what does it mean to deliver software on time? It means that we are able to make reasonable estimates, reasonable commitments, track our progress at the very early part of the project, and adjust our plan so we'll know by this ship date we'll have this scope, or if we need the scope, it'll be done by this date. And Scrum gives us those tools.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Scrum is the easiest way of successfully projecting when you're done with a certain amount of scope, or how long it will take to get that certain amount of scope, given that you have some historical data on your existing project.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess it will be the last one. They would like you to comment on the reasons for the 2 key Scrum processes, which are the daily stand-up and time-boxed sprints.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason that we have those are key processes. The daily stand-up is basically, I look at it as, if you look at a sprint planning meeting where you make the sprint commitment as a marriage, the daily stand-up is where you repeat your commitment daily. You repeat your vows. So it's a way of getting up there and saying, this is what I'm going to work on. This is what I've done. This is what I'm going to do by the next meeting. And this is basically, if I can, this is why. And what's important about that is when people continue to repeat, it's a sociological reason. When people continue to repeat a commitment, they live up to it subconsciously. It gives you a better incentive. And people know if other people are struggling. So if I hear, as a Scrum Master, hear somebody repeat they've been working on the same task for 3 days, and I think that maybe it's only a 1-day task, then even if they're telling me they're not stuck, maybe they are and they're afraid to admit it, so I can go walk down the hall after the meeting and see what's going on and help them with that. Right. And what was the other part of the question again?
Time-boxed sprint.
Yeah, the time boxing is so important is because deadlines drive delivery. If we don't have a deadline, it's like we're all in college and we all got term papers assigned the first week of the semester. And most didn't start working until the last week of the semester. Whereas if some professors would give us checkpoints, like in 2 weeks I want an outline, in 4 weeks I want so forth and so on, a first draft, it makes you keep up with the work so you don't postpone it. So by having a deadline, it focuses you. It's like the old saying that nothing concentrates the mind forcefully as a prospect of being hanged in a fortnight, right? You've got to get it done in 2 weeks or so you're not going to delay, dink around, or postpone or procrastinate because you can't. You don't have the time to. This is why time boxing is so important. And sure, the time box also, when you're that last day, if you know you can't go past it, you didn't get your commitment done, now you have to face the fact that I didn't get done what I thought I could get done in this time. So you have to ask yourself, why didn't I get it done? And then you have to address the why so you can fix it and do it better next time.
Okay, we're out of time. Jim, I certainly appreciate the presentation. Very informative and very nicely done. I'd certainly like to thank John Clifford for his time and the folks at Construx for sponsoring this webinar. And I'd certainly like to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. On behalf of SD Times, I'd like to thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next time. So long.
Thank you.